Do you know what to do after a nuclear event? For example, is the water safe to drink? Is it safe to grow a garden in soil that has been contaminated by radioactive fallout? For answers to these, stay tuned. Hey, Provident Preppers, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Kylene. The threat of a nuclear war or a nuclear event is more real than it has ever been. And it is important that we have the skills, the resources, and the knowledge that we need to safely navigate through our new world should such an event occur.
So today we're going to talk to Jay Whimpey again. We've talked with him twice before on other videos. We'll leave links in the description. Now those two videos covered expedient sheltering, which is things that you can do right now. You've got to put this shelter together, as well as DIY shelters, things that take a little longer and a little more money, but will do a better job of protecting your family. Today we're going to be talking about the tail end of this and what we can do, what we can't do, how we're going to make this work. So Jay's an expert on these things, and he's going to enlighten us.
So once the event has occurred and you get to come out of your shelter, what do we do and how do we navigate that world? That is what this video is all about. Now, in the description of this video, I am going to leave links to some resources that we think are really important for every prepper to have in their prepper library, because it has all of this stuff listed in it, right? You can use it as a reference so that you can remember what it is you need to do and how to keep your family safe. So let's see what Jay has to say.
Hey, Provident Preppers, we are excited to be here today again with Jay Whimpey. This is the third in the three-part series. The first video that we did was on expedient shelter, what we can do on a short-term basis to get ready for something that's coming. The second video was all about kind of, okay, if you want to build some kind of shelter, here are some options. Here's the way to go about it. This video is all about how we proceed after a nuclear event. The event has happened. We're in our shelter. Where do we go from here? And Jay is such an expert on this. Again, Jay is the president of the American Civil Defense Association, also the president of the Utah Civil Defense Volunteers. And he has a wealth of knowledge on nuclear events, whether that's a power plant. In most cases, what we're talking about right now is a nuclear war, because that seems to be the big thing in the news. It seems to be on everyone's minds. That's what we're addressing today. Okay, if there is a nuclear event, where do we go? So Jay, talk to us about where we go after we've been sitting in our shelter and how long you can address that. What do we do then?
And wait, before we actually jump into that, I would like, Jay, and it's been overwhelming in the comments of the first video that we did. We had so many people say it's impossible to survive and that it's better just to go out and walk toward the blast. And I think that I'd really like for you to very clearly explain first, before we get into surviving afterwards, is it possible to survive? Is it worth doing anything?
And this is truly important, because we are very positive, optimistic people, and I know you are too. This disturbs us a little bit that people just want to walk into it and die, because that doesn't have to be the case, and you don't have to do a tremendous amount to actually survive and have a good life thereafter. So I agree. Let's address that.
Speak to the actual, is there a chance to survive, and what does that chance look like?
You know, we tend to have our opinions covered or colored by the movies that we've seen, you know, and it is hopeless, and, you know, there's total death and destruction. And actually, even if you look at the map in nuclear war survival skills, even in a classical nuclear attack where perhaps hundreds to thousands of nuclear warheads are expended on our soil, there's large swaths of land that are virtually untouched from either the blast or radiation effects. And so there's lots of open land that is, you know, will not be touched, basically. So there is hope, and there is a reason to survive. The other what would you say, dying of radiation sickness and dying of physical burns or whatever are very painful. And so, you know, it would be best to try and avoid that if possible. I'm going to try to avoid that. And so, you know, people think of dying of radiation maybe over a few days, but it could take weeks, and it's a very unpleasant way to die. And so if you're planning on doing that, then you should make other arrangements, I guess, to die more quickly. But
No.
I like to think that we're trying to eliminate suffering, human suffering, so our own and that of others. And that's kind of why I do what I do, is to eliminate suffering. But there is a lot of hope. And the biggest thing is just knowing what to do. Even if you just bought the Nuclear War Survival Skills book and read it after the event, you'd be in pretty good shape. Or at least you could take some reasonable and prudent actions, I guess, to protect yourself and others. And so we should plan on surviving, make a few little preparations in advance, and an expedient shelter isn't all that expensive, and you can build yourself a real posh shelter for somewhere. Just the difference between a used car and a new car, that $10,000 can actually make a big difference in, building yourself a very nice fallout shelter, and even a blast shelter. So if you're willing to do a little bit of the work yourself. So, and even, if you have a basement, or even if there's a parking structure nearby, you could have a little trailer, perhaps, and just go find your little spot that you've previously picked out, and hunker down there for a while. So there's lots of ways to do this, but there is a good reason to survive, and life will not be so difficult that you would regret that you lived, I guess. And I think it's going to be pretty nice. Basically, after a nuclear event, if you do have an expedient shelter in your home, in your basement, perhaps, basically it's not wait 30 days and then you come out and go back to life as normal. It's more of a transition where we talked about how, within a month or so, the initial radiation has decayed down to a point where it's less than 1/1000th of what it was originally. And that might allow you to come out of your shelter for short periods of time. So maybe after a month or so, you come out for half an hour in order to get rid of some waste and perhaps bring some more supplies into your little shelter space. And then, maybe later on you can spend an hour out there, and then for a few months, then you perhaps would want to sleep in your shelter where you're somewhat isolated from the background radiation. And then you can, maybe after a year or so, you're perhaps back to more like life as normal. There are a lot of questions as to this period of time, I guess. One big question is the rad block, or the potassium iodide or potassium iodate. Basically, the theory for taking those is that there is a fair amount of radioactive iodine that is produced with the fallout. Iodine has a reasonable vapor pressure, and so even without ingesting any of the fallout or things that have been contaminated by the fallout, you could actually receive some radioactive iodine just by breathing. And so that's why it's a big concern. It does not protect you from direct radiation. It only protects this one single pathway of absorbing radioactive iodine. Your body's always trying to collect iodine from the environment, and because it's a necessary element that you need for your thyroid and other bodily functions. And so one way to protect yourself from this particular pathway, which is a significant risk, is by either filling your body with non-radioactive iodine, and then once your body's satisfied its need, then it won't try and absorb any more iodine from the environment, and so it'll just slough off whatever else, whatever extra iodine your body comes into contact. Potassium iodide is an iodine salt, and therefore it can be absorbed by your body, and it's not going to burn you like elemental iodine is actually a very powerful oxidizer, and so you have to be careful with that. So, we don't want to take, iodine directly, but an iodide salt is healthy, and it can work out pretty good. These particular tablets are 50 milligrams, and it's recommended that an adult take 2 tablets a day. These are 50 milligram tablets, and there's 200 in the bottle. And basically, they recommend taking it for roughly 90 days after an event. And so you could basically take the contents of 1 bottle for 1 adult, and that would be about right. They say children from 3 to 12 should only take 1 tablet a day. And then there's also some instructions for children younger than 3, and that it includes cutting the tablets into pieces and then feeding it with some other materials. They recommend that you take this with food because, well, it's just it's an unpleasant tasting salt, and if you mix it with some food, you know, it's easier on your palate and on your stomach. So that's a good way to do.
How about pregnant or nursing moms?
No, there are some instructions there, and they say you shouldn't take it for more than 2 days or consult with a physician. So I don't think a nursing mom would have too much trouble. However, and it might, you know, you'd probably have enough material there that would get passed on to an infant, you know, so that you wouldn't have to feed a nursing baby any more than what they're getting from their mother. And, you know, you could research that a little bit more carefully. I guess I don't have a lot of hard and fast answers. I don't know that there's a lot of studies that have actually been done on this, but it's good to have. I guess an alternative, I guess, would be potassium iodate. Potassium iodate is it works, but it works in a different way. You know, this supplies iodine directly that you can absorb. Potassium iodate actually blocks the receptors that would tend to absorb more iodine. So it, you know, it kind of looks like iodine. However, it would tend to, you know, the molecule is too big, it won't really act as iodine, but it actually, or an iodide ion, I guess I should say. But it's an iodine, but it's too big, so it can't be absorbed directly as iodine, but the iodate will actually block those receptors, kind of clog them up while there's some in the, you know, while it's in your system, and therefore it keeps you from absorbing the iodine, but it just blocks the receptors. It doesn't actually take the place of any other iodine.
One other question I had for you. So we have a box that we bought many years ago, and the expiration date is 6/2005. Is this, will it still do its job? Do I need to get rid of it and buy new? What would I do?
It should be just fine. It's like you don't really worry about the expiration dates on, say, table salt, sodium chloride. You know, it's chemically stable, and so it really shouldn't expire. You know, they put expiration dates on many things that don't really need to be there. We've actually covered that in some issues of the Journal of Civil Defense, but basically, I wouldn't worry about the expiration dates. I think it would still work just as well, just because it's such a stable material.
Okay. So this, while this would be really good for somebody to have and take, it's not going to protect you from the radiation. It's only going to protect you from one facet, right? So yeah, just because you take this doesn't make you Superman and you can't go outside. Correct. Okay.
So it's just that one little narrow thing, and I know people think, you know, it's going to make me impervious to radiation, but that's not the case. It just keeps you from absorbing radioactive iodine.
When is it going to be safe to leave the fallout shelter? We kind of talked about that transition. What do you think? And I know it depends on where you live, but for the most part, how long should somebody plan on hunkering down before they start to go out in phases?
You know, the more I've thought about that, it's almost critical that you have your own radiation detection equipment. And as we know, in nuclear war survival skills, there is a way to build a dosimeter. Basically, it's just some little metal plates hung on some string inside of a little can, and with the scale that comes out of the book, and basically you charge it with one of your piezoelectric devices, like a like those little butane flame things. But anyway, and the amount of radiation that it receives is correlated to the amount of radiation, because ionizing radiation tends to deplete the charge on the plates, and that's how you know. So, but I would really recommend having some sort of radiation detection equipment, because you just don't know. I guess one other, well, if you went outside and there was virtually no dust, besides the normal clay type dust that gets blown around by the wind, if there were no fallout there, you should be in really good shape. But it would be nice to confirm that and get an idea of the level of radiation out there. And at that point, you don't worry about it. But if there's a relatively heavy dust, maybe with rounded particles, perhaps on the hood of a car, or some other nice smooth flat surface that is obviously there, then you'd know that you had received some fallout, and radiation detection is critical. Basically, you want to keep from receiving over 200 rads of radiation over, say, a 6-month period. And so if it were 1/10 of a rad, and you spent a full day, or even if you're in and out of your house or whatever, basically that would be 2.4 rads per day, because it usually gives you the reading in rads per hour, and so over 180 days you'd receive 400 rads overall, at that particular level. So you'd want to try and stay in most of the time, I would say, if your meter's showing above 1/10 of a rad per hour. If it's down around 1/100th or 1/1000th, then you could make that same determination. If you're receiving, say, 1/10 of that, 0.24 per day, you multiply that by the 180 days in 6 months. Basically, you're what's that, 60, I guess. And so at that point, you're basically okay. You're not going to be receiving a lethal dose of radiation.
So as I understand this, it's cumulative. So I have to be really careful that the amount that I accumulate isn't going to be over 200 rads, right?
Right.
Okay. Let's move on to water. So it's my understanding that if my water is in a container, it's still safe to drink. What about when we run out of our water that we have stored?
Again, just filtering, a real good mechanical filtration should remove essentially all of the radioactive materials. It's very, well, usually the particles are fairly big. So most of the normal water filters that are doing some relatively fine mechanical filtration, especially the ultrafiltration, down to 0.2 microns, like a Berkey or something like that, they should make the water safe to drink. If you, I always like to follow up, just because if the water is contaminated with something else, you could follow up with a carbon filtration, and at that point, your water, should definitely be safe to drink. So a good water filter, filtering down below 1 micron or maybe a 0.5 micron, and then followed up with carbon filtration should make water safe to drink.
So let me just make sure that I understand this. So when we're filtering the water, it's possible that there is fallout, right, which is radioactive, that we're putting in the filter. So the water that comes out is safe, but is it possible that I could be taking on some rads just from the water that I've put in there? Do I need to make sure that that filter is in a separate place filtering and not actually in my shelter?
Potentially, if there were heavy contamination, potentially you could bring the water, or you could be collecting radioactivity particles in your water filter, and so perhaps you wouldn't want to put that right in your filter, and you could just bring in filtered water, and that might be one of chores that you do while you're out, you filter a little bit of water and just bring the water back in and leave the filter outside. So that is a legitimate pathway, although it would be, it'd have to be some fairly heavy contamination in order for that to be a concern.
And it would seem to me that you would want to maybe pre-filter that water before you put it in your filter. It would seem that might clog your filter. Is that something that
that's always a good idea,
especially pre-filter?
Yes, and if you're filtering down to lower micron levels, it's always good to have some rough pre-filters, and the rough pre-filters should take care of the majority of the radioactive particles, and so that would help substantially. The filter socks that we've recommended that filter down to 1 micron or half a micron, they should take care of most of that, and you would probably want to filter through a rough pre-filter before you go through your good filters, especially with the ultrafiltration and the ceramic filter elements like a Berkey or a Catadine, something of that nature.
Yeah.
Theoretically, if your municipal water supply is still working, is it possible that would be contaminated, and should you filter that before drinking it?
Yeah, municipal water systems usually use a relatively rough filtration. And so I would filter even water that came through a municipal supply. Perhaps for the first few hours, it's going to produce good water. And so I guess that's something you might want to do, right after a nuclear event, before the fallout settles. You could actually fill up a few water containers if the water system is still working.
Oh, I was going to say some of that will depend on your water system. If they're pulling from underground, you're probably going to have water that's good longer term. If you're drawing surface water, if it's coming from streams and springs that are seeing daylight, then you're probably more at risk, I would think.
It's kind of a good thing to find out now, right?
Yeah.
Find out
Yeah.
so that you know.
And this makes a really strong case for having water storage in your home, having the ability to have clean water that you know is good where you need it. So that's
Okay, let's talk just for a second about sanitation in your shelter. Because obviously, if you're not, if you have running water and you have your sewer, you're blessed. But if you don't, how do we take care of sanitation in a hallway in the middle of a home?
That is a little bit of it's going to be a little bit of a chore. You'll need something like a porta potty. They have 5-gallon, or most of them have roughly a 2 to 5 gallon reservoir, and that's only going to take care of a family for a week or two. You'd probably need a small drum, because you're in a relatively small space with a low ceiling and such. So, and perhaps that's something that you could afford to have a few minutes to take the reservoir out of your porta potty and put it in that drum to store it, or pour it down the drain if you're septic system, or I guess even down the regular toilet if it's part of a sewer system. I guess the sewer system will be filling up. You're definitely going to want to conserve water, and so perhaps some of the cleaning and such could be taken care of with the flushable wipes, and then just put in a big garbage bag, and that can be set outside the shelter when they become full. So you'll need some garbage bags and a lot of the wet wipes, diaper wipes, and things of that nature to keep yourself a little bit clean. I go on some camping trips, and it's really it's almost unpleasant when you start sticking to yourself, and after you've been a few days without a shower, it's really nice to just be able to rub off. But you can give yourself a pretty good bath with just a wet wash rag or some of these disposable wipes, and so you can use that for some sanitation, keep your hands clean and things of that nature, and then just have the containers ready to go for your actual human waste, and then whatever waste you tend to generate, you need to be able to bag it and get rid of it.
Okay. Let's talk just a little bit about food. Obviously, we encourage everyone to have a supply of food on hand. We encourage at least 60 days of shelf-stable foods, things that you have in your pantry, and then a longer-term supply of food. Obviously, this is important, but as we move forward, we're going to be eating that food. How about things like growing a garden? Or let's say you find some cans of food, but it's got some dust on it. Tell us a little bit about how we move ahead with food.
Basically, any food that's in a sealed container, whether it be a pouch or a can, is going to be safe. If there seems to be some contamination on the outside of the pouch or the can, it's advisable to give it a good thorough wiping or rinsing, I guess, before you open it, in order to prevent that contamination. But whatever is in the can is safe to consume. I guess, when you're in a tight space and you don't have a lot of room for cooking or food preparation, it's good to store the foods that are going to be relatively easy to eat, perhaps directly out of the can or the pouch. The MREs that the military makes, or that are available from a lot of commercial suppliers, are really handy for this. You can actually get the MRE heaters, which they create a little bit of water vapor, and they do require maybe half an ounce of water or something of that nature. But basically, they can heat your food up to where it's a little bit more palatable. There's like the Progresso soups that are a little bit larger can, and they don't need to be diluted. And so, they would be a good meal, I guess, that you can eat directly out of the can. So that's, there's a lot of things, a lot of options, I guess, that you could have ready for having to live in a shelter space, the easy to eat and easy to prepare foods that don't require heating up. If you did want to heat some water and things of that nature, and maybe reconstitute some freeze-dried stuff, they make the little cans of fuel for chafing dishes and such. The little cans with either a glycol or an alcohol there, that you could use, set up and eat, or to use to heat your food, or in a little pan that would be, relatively safe. You want to be careful about your ventilation, because you are consuming oxygen when you have that flame. So you just have to be concerned about that. That's something that the MRE heaters would be a little bit better. I've actually tried putting MRE heaters underneath a pan, and they they heat that little bit of water up to the boiling point of water. And so, it may take a half a dozen MRE heaters, but you're not going to consume oxygen. You are going to warm things up a little bit, which would be nice. So, and then food afterwards, and producing food, basically if there's an apple on a tree or something that has a peel, or at least a nice smooth skin that you feel like you can clean off adequately, you could actually eat that fruit because you can clean it appropriately. Something like a raspberry or strawberry would be much more difficult to get clean, and so you might want to avoid those. Eating animals that perhaps are showing the ill effects of radiation are supposed to be good. You can eat the muscle tissue, but it's good to not put bones in, take the bones and boil them to make soup, but you could, and you're also supposed to not eat the internal organs like the livers and hearts and things like that, but maybe just go for the muscle tissue. It should be safe. Again, contamination is your worst, or your biggest concern there. So, try to just make sure things aren't, there's no contamination. But if you're skinning an animal, then it should, and avoiding contamination beyond that, it should be edible.
So what about, okay, say it were to happen, we had an event in October. Could I safely grow food in my garden that has had radioactive fallout on it in the next spring?
A lot of what I'm saying now is conjecture, but if you just look at the pathways, the radioactive material, you just have to be careful not to ingest it. But a living plant is fairly careful to absorb nutrients out of the environment and not get contaminated. So you should be able to grow plants and eat the plants if they're the plants that you can wash easily, as we mentioned before. So again, it would be really nice to have a low-level radiation meter, maybe be able to detect that, but it should be relatively safe to eat. I would probably, maybe you could forego 1 year, I guess. If you had enough food storage, you could go 1 year and just plant the next year when the radioactivity would have had another year to decay.
So theoretically, if I had a greenhouse, I could still grow in my greenhouse because none of the dust would have impacted that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
And you could also cover, maybe as one of your action items, when you know this is coming, you could cover your beds. If you have something like a garden bed, would that make some sense to throw a tarp over it? Is that going to
just tack it down and that would do pretty good. And then just as you peel the tarp off, just be careful not to dump whatever dust may have fallen on the tarp on the garden. Just make sure that dust goes off to one side and don't disturb that as much as possible, and you could go about farming in your relatively clean little spot.
One of the thoughts that I did have was, okay, all of this happens and 2 years from now, I'm buying more wheat or I'm buying more rice. Would that be safe if those fields had been contaminated, or is it possible that I could be purchasing, because like wheat, a lot of times there's the chafing and it's not washed really well, and I don't know, could it be contaminated? Would I need to worry about that?
Yeah, I would say, the combine, they don't clean the wheat really good. They do get the, most of the chaff off the individual kernels of wheat, and so it does a pretty good job. I might be tempted to take your wheat or your rice and rinse it good before you actually grind it to eat it, and that should make it safer. I know a rice kernel and a wheat kernel are relatively, what would you say, intact and shiny to where you should be able to do a fairly thorough job of cleaning it.
Anything else we should know about the food aspect of this?
Well, it's much more convenient to store more food, and right now, wheat and rice are frivolously cheap. So buy in bulk, and that will definitely make your life more simple.
Yes. Okay, let's talk a little bit about communication. Communication is an important thing. Obviously, as a result of a nuclear event, a lot of communications will be down. We won't be able to pick those up. But tell us a little bit about how we might get good information, and maybe if you have some ideas on both two-way communication, connecting with other people, and receiving one-way information that we need to understand or know. Give us a little idea on communications.
There are radio stations that are nuclear hardened, and I think there would be a substantial effort to actually keep those in operation. If there's not a lot of physical damage, then they should be able to come back online relatively quickly. And so you should have a good portable battery operated radio and plenty of the batteries or some way to power those radios. Beyond that, there's some good shortwave radios to where you can actually receive one-way communications from stations all over the world, which would be interesting for you, I think, to know what conditions are, in a wider area. And then other than that, ham radios are really nice. It's becomes much more expensive and a lot more involved, I guess, in operating a ham station. But you can actually you can buy a ham radio and set up an antenna and all that kind of stuff, and you can just listen legally even without a ham license. Getting a ham license is not that hard. It probably takes less than 10 hours of study, I would say, and you can get your initial ham license and start to learn about that. And then I found people who are ham radio operators are anxious to share their knowledge. And so, but that's something that you'd have to do before the event. But you should be able to have find a ham radio operator in the area and talk to them, and they can help you get your radio set up. And maybe you can, there even if there's not an EMP event, there is an EMP effect around a nuclear weapon. If you're close, say you're in 30, 40 miles of a nuclear weapon going off, there will be a substantial electromagnetic pulse associated just directly with that weapon going off. And so it's good to try and protect your equipment, putting it in a Faraday cage. You might want to keep an antenna perhaps in a safe place as well, in case there's some physical damage outside. But it's relatively inexpensive. You can buy a fairly modest ham radio for a couple $100 and an antenna for $50 or maybe $100. In fact, there's a set of antennas called, they're like EM1 and EM2, and it's or is it emergency communications anyway. There are relatively simple wire antennas that are quite easy to set up, and you can use them, and there's no chance in damaging the radio in that. You can just stroll through the dial and see what's out there and who's talking, because there will be ham operators that are talking, and they will be talking to each other, and you'll be able to listen in on some of those conversations and try and determine what what may be going on in the local area, or even areas that are removed far from you. It's always good to keep your family together, and the FMRS or GMRS radios are really handy for that. They are relatively inexpensive. It seems like the main costs associated with those radios are the batteries and the recharging system. If you buy a set that has lithium iron phosphate batteries, and has a recharging station and all that, they tend to be a little bit more expensive than the ones that you would just put alkaline batteries in the back. But for $50 or $60, you can buy a set of radios. And if you have a larger family group, you might want to buy several sets and just have those available, so that if you are either traveling, or you're just doing some exploring in the area, you can stay in contact and make sure you keep your group that you care about together.
Very good point.
Good ideas. Okay.
Can we talk just a little bit about light? We want to make sure that there's some kind of a light source to make it, because like if we were in the middle of our hall, even during the daytime, there's not light. So what exactly would you recommend, considering that flame sources of light chew up your oxygen and are a bit dangerous, especially in small places?
Yeah, I would say you can stay with electric lights, and you might want to stay with a relatively modest light source. You can actually, when your eyes are adjusted to the dark, you can see remarkably well with a relatively faint source of light. And I know the trend these days is to put more and more power in those little LED lights, and it's a great thing if you're trying to look across your pasture, if you're looking at something 50 to 100 yards away. But they also make very modest power, maybe 20 or 30 lumens that would go a long time on just normal alkaline batteries. And you could buy quite a few batteries and just plan on several months worth of batteries to power those relatively modest lights in that small area. Okay. I love having a big 300 or 400 lumen flashlight in my pocket, and in fact, anyway, I tend to keep one around, but these come with rechargeable batteries. In fact, they came with I think roughly 10 rechargeable batteries, and these things will go, just in what I use them, I guess they'll go for months, I guess, between charges. They have the 18 365 batteries in them that are rechargeable, so that's pretty good. But they have little small little lantern things at Harbor Freight and places like that are relatively modest, and a lantern, a little area light would actually make life much more livable in a shelter space where you likely won't have a lot of outside light.
Right.
And okay, we understand that we totally need to prepare like we don't have electricity and we don't have any other services. Is there a chance that we could still have electricity?
There's three major grids in the United States, and the interconnectedness is the problem, I guess. If there's a problem in one area, it usually tends to cascade, throughout at least that grid. And so odds are you won't have electricity. And, and especially if people aren't out managing the power plants and things of that nature, odds are you won't have it. If you're lucky enough to have it, that's great. I wouldn't question it, just enjoy it and just prepare for it to go away, with no notice at all. So that's great. I would say odds are you should plan on doing without electricity. It's great to have a generator, and great to have a battery system, or, even a small solar system, solar power system that you set up after a nuclear event. You could set that up and, have the cord already run into your little shelter, or especially if it's in a basement, I guess you could run your cord outside, just leave the cord dangling out there, I guess. And then when you need to use it, you could run out there with a solar panel and connect it up to your little solar generator box that will keep the battery charged and supply you with the power that you need. So again, well, you're looking at something in the range of $400 to $600, I guess, for a little a small solar system with a solar generator, that has the inverter and charge controller all in one neat little package.
Yeah. Okay, let's bounce to another subject here, and that is heat. In the winter, you may need a little bit of heat, although just the bodies in the shelter may produce enough. In the summer, we might be looking at some difficult heat situations where that heat builds up. Give us a little idea on, of course, we're going to have some air filtration. We'll need some air filtration, both for the oxygen and for heat. Can you just describe what you envision would be appropriate?
Yeah, you might want to prepare for a little fan. I know there's some little fans that will run off a USB port that would provide a little bit of air movement, and you'd have to make somewhat of a pathway for that. But I think with nice blankets and a little bit of foam padding underneath you, you should be able to stay warm in even the coldest winters. I know you guys have experimented with that, and it's not trivial. But if we were dressed up like Jim Phillips, would suggest, with some good winter clothing and some perhaps some foam clothing, that would definitely keep you warm in essentially any situation inside of a structure. I know the bottom of a parking structure would get fairly cold, but you do have a little bit of ground heat, I guess, that would be available there as well. But and you should prepare for the opposite. Putting a lot of people in a small space requires some ventilation for cooling and air, and so you should arrange for some small fans. The article in the latest version, or the latest issue of the Journal of Civil Defense, showed a Kearney air pump. Again, the original concept came from nuclear war survival skills, but you can build yourself a small positive displacement pump, and you just have a rod that you draw back and forth, and that tends to, that will bring air into your shelter. And the article in the Journal of Civil Defense actually showed how you could put some respirator filters on that, and you can actually make a chemical biological type filter out of this positive displacement air pump, and you can move air and make sure that it's filtered air as well. So that would be a relatively good idea. It's not a trivial project, but most people that can run a hand saw, a skill saw, and put screws in wood and run a drill, could put that thing together in a day or two. So it might be worth spending a little bit of time. Other than that, yeah, I don't know. It's the gearing is the problem. Being able to move something fast enough to do much good as far as using a fan by hand. But something like a little air pump like that would be ideal. A little positive displacement air pump.
Okay, good information. One other topic is that of transportation. As we do get out a little bit, I would guess many of the cars won't function. Fuel will probably be difficult to get. What ideas do you have on, if you do need to get around a little bit, how are we going to do that?
We're definitely talking about later, like
yes,
months later,
after we've transitioned, or even if you can go out for a half hour and you have to run someplace. Obviously, bicycles are good, but thoughts and ideas on that?
Yeah, bicycles are, ideal. They're probably the most efficient source of transportation. If you arrange to have some panniers or a platform in the back of your bicycle where you can move some stuff around, that's ideal. The electric bikes are great. I bought a couple and I've been experimenting with those. My wife and it's just really opens up a lot more possibilities where you can have an electric bike that has a range of 20 or 30 miles, depending on how much you pedal, and will move along at 20 miles an hour. That's a pretty effective transportation. But we have to make arrangements or have to plan on moving some heavier things around. So having a car and a truck is a good thing. Probably the older the better. That have point and condenser type ignition systems or a diesel that doesn't have a lot of electronics on it would function. Even after an EMP. Batteries would be okay. Starter motors will probably be okay in most situations. Alternators may or may not be okay. So we will need something to be able to charge batteries to keep the vehicles moving. And then we will also need fuel. And so, I know it's a real ticklish situation to talk about storing fuel, and they shouldn't be, substantial fuel storage shouldn't be located near or in your house. But, if you have a fence line or, maybe along your back fence or somewhere away from your house, you could store, lots of the little gas cans, perhaps in a lawn shed, and you might even be able to add, some drums. And the drums don't necessarily need to be inside of a shed. You can buy a water heater drip pan and place that over the top of your drums and keep the water off the top and keep the bungs tightly sealed and add a little bit of stable or some other gasoline or diesel stabilizer. And you should be able to store fuel and have transportation when you need it.
Okay. What other questions do you have, Mama?
All right. I just want to leave with hope. It's really important to me that we talk about, I know one of the comments said, I don't want to live in a post nuclear life, right? I don't want to live when people are out there and there's all the craziness. Back to the movies, right? Where hopefully we'll do a better job of taking care of each other, right? But I really think that there is reason to have hope. Will it be rough? Absolutely. Let's talk about having your whole family in an enclosed space for a month. If we all come out alive from that situation. But there is reason to hope. So help us speak to that a little bit.
Well, everything that I've talked about is doable. And when you collect it all together, it does seem like a daunting task. However, if you take a little piece at a time and just say, this week I'm going to get my food storage together. This week I'm going to get my water storage together. Any one of these chores I could take care of in in a couple of evenings. You can go buy some drums. You can fill them up with wheat or water or whatever. Go buy a few planks at the Home Depot or where the lumber yard, and you can build that shelter and just take the food storage that you got, or food storage from like the church's home storage centers or whatever. It's just marvelous. You go down there and they have food already packaged in number 10 cans and they're put in boxes with 6 cans to a box. Very easy to move around for most people, and you can build a shelter just out of those boxes themselves, and just buy some boxes and arrange them to where you can get a pretty a decent little living space, I guess, next to a wall that's buried on the other side in your basement. So, like I said, I guess you put it all together. If you have reasonable resources, a few $1,000s. I realize that sounds like a lot, especially in these days, but actually, when you consider that food's going up at 20% per year, I'm thinking that food is still available and still very cheap, compared to what it will be, in a disaster situation. So it would make sense to prioritize and make some of these preparations in advance in order to ensure your own safety and survival. And it will be worth it. There are good people out there, and many people will panic and die, and we do have to perhaps make arrangements for a little bit of security as well while we're taking care of some of our other. It is something that's definitely doable and can actually be kind of fun. It can be a family activity. You make a few assignments. Okay, you go research the lights and find us some good lights and calculate. You can put a set of batteries in one of the little lanterns and turn it on and just see how many days it goes, and then you'll know how many batteries to buy. Just a bit of experience, and if you also remember that. You need a backup for everything, and sometimes 2 or 3 backups isn't a bad idea. So just make sure that you take care of each one of these little items, and it can be a fun family event that can draw people closer together and can be kind of interesting and intellectually stimulating. So enjoy yourself and have fun doing a few little projects, and you have an immense amount of information to guide you. Nuclear war survival skills and the past issues of the Journal of Civil Defense is basically all you need, and all that can be obtained for less than $30. Then that can guide you and help you on your way. And I notice that when I'm contemplating a project, it's usually my own uncertainty and feeling of inadequacy, I guess, that keeps me from forging ahead on a project. But if you with a fair amount of information, then confidence increases, and don't be afraid to make a mistake or two. But we have people. You have Jonathan Kylene, and you have other people in the civil defense organizations that would love to help you. So I would say just good luck and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Jay. I do agree. There is reason to be hopeful. There is reason to move ahead with faith, with optimism, and we just need to take a few steps now. So thank you, Jay, for your time, for all this wonderful information, and you will be blessing our audience, and we appreciate that so much. So now for the question of the day: what can you do this week or next that will move you closer to being in a happier, more prepared place? Comment below. And thanks for being part of the solution.